Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another video tutorial by Kevin Harper. This one is about my favorite new feature in 3 Studio Max 2014, which is the mParticle system. I recently worked on a music video where I had to animate a bunch of pieces of paper, as you can see here, but we needed the pieces of paper to do some very specific things, such as collide with objects, collide with the floor, sometimes even collide with each other, and so on and so forth. You can easily set up a rig and hand animate it, but when you have hundreds of pieces of paper, that's obviously not an option. So I turned to a plugin which I've used before, it's called Toolbox 2, Toolbox 3. You know Toolbox 1 already because that is pretty much pFlow, which was integrated into 3 Studio Max in some earlier version. And now Toolbox 2 and Toolbox 3 has also been implemented into 3D Studio Max 2014 as the new mParticle system, which is fantastic because what it basically allows you to do is have like real physics driven collisions and gives you a lot more control over your particles. Now this is not a beginner's tutorial. If you don't already love and use pFlow, then this is probably not for you. You might want to skip this one, and I'll see you in some other video. But yeah, this is a more advanced tutorial because we're going to kind of go through some of the basic steps we took to set up that rig. So the original rig, or what this whole thing is based on, and what I'm going to talk about in this tutorial, is a tutorial that Orbots or whatever they call it, the people who made Toolbox, made for specifically this purpose, pieces of paper. So they made this tutorial that was very well and very easy to follow, and all I did to implement this on a larger scale for hundreds of pieces of papers or more was basically just kind of automate the process of paper generation and rigging it to a particle mesh, a particle rig, or skinning it to a particle rig via a script. So I would just really automate everything and then just run everything through. But I'm just going to do the very basic tutorial of the foundation of it, right, and explain a little bit of the points behind it. So let's get started. So the first thing we want to do is definitely, like in most projects, we want to set up a units, right, so that we know what we're working in. I'm going to do decimal inches, not necessarily because I like the American system over the world system, but because I know the size of a piece of paper in the American system. So I'm going to make a piece of paper, and I'm just going to say this is 11 inches long and 8 inches wide. So it's like a standard, print size piece of paper. I'm going to get this 1-in-1 segments, and then I'm going to zero it out in positioning. Right, so we have it nicely in the middle. So this is really just a scale reference. This is not what I will use as the actual piece of paper, because obviously I do not have any segments within the piece of paper, and so it won't bend properly. I'm going to add a pFlow system or particle source. Actually, can I just hit 6? Yes. So I just hit 6 to bring up the particle view without 6 on the keyboard, without actually creating a pFlow system, because I'm going to create a mParticle flow instead. So you can see, if you are familiar with a little bit with Toolbox 2, Toolbox 3, then you can see they just really switched out the word physics for MP, which stands for mParticles. but for the most part, everything seems to be the same. It seems to have a little bit better functionality with MaxScript, so you can actually see in your listener what's happening when you're making changes within your particle system than you had with toolbox. So that's a great thing. So let's get started with if you've never used PhysX, here's a little rundown. So this is a PhysX flow, or a toolbox flow. So we're going to use mParticle flow. I'm going to drag that in. It's going to create a whole flow that is needed for just a basic mParticle system. So now if we go in here, we can already see it created a grid of particles. It created this box, which I'm going to explain in a second. But if we scroll the timeline, we can see that these are not just falling, but they're really acting within the physics world. So they collide with each other. They're colliding with a ground plane right now. They're being manipulated by gravity. So it's not your average particle system, right? So now you could get a similar result with adding a gravity force and adding a collision. But if you use the old particle system, you are aware that particles collide based on their pivot points, not based on like a collision mesh, which in this case is different. You can see that the particles are actually colliding against each other's borders instead of just a pivot point, which of course means that they intersect with each other a lot less. So here, let's go over this a little bit. So this is, you're familiar with this, it's just the system. And then down here we have our first event. And you're familiar with birth event because of, this is the birth that we used to use, or that you use if you use the normal system. But a birth grid is basically just spawning particles within a grid. It can be a 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional grid depending on how you set it up. I'm going to go over that a little bit too. The shape is just the general shape. This is from the normal system. But then we have something called an mParticle shape. And this mParticle shape is basically your collision. So you can change this to box, sphere, capsule, or concave hull. And concave hull is if you have more complicated shapes, right? Now, if you want to visualize these shapes, you can select this, and we can see that this is what's happening. We can also not have them conform to the box and give them a specific size individually of the shape of the box. So they would now collide very differently, as you can see if I run this animation. You see they really go into each other because the collision shape is now much smaller than the actual shape of the object. This spin is a spin. You're familiar with this, but we don't need that. This is something, if you're not familiar with toolbox, then this is new to you. So this is your physics world, or your mParticle world. So what this does is just basically it links these particles to this physics system. So if you click on this and you go to your modify tab, you can see that this has some parameters such as apply gravity and ground collision. This X on the bottom specifies that it has a ground collision for a visual representation of it, but if you uncheck this and check this, you can see that it can get rid of the, not gravity, ground plane. It can get rid of the ground plane, so now if I run the simulation, it does not collide with the floor, or I can turn this back on and turn off gravity, and now it won't fall, it'll just push it, they'll just kind of push each other away a little bit, or not even. Yeah, they spaced out pretty well. So yeah, so gravity and so on and so forth. There are some more advanced parameters, but we're not going to go over those right now. So basically, let's say we wanted to use this grid system, which we won't be using later, but let's say we want to be using this grid system to create a rig. So let me just go over the philosophy a little bit of what we're trying to do, right? What we're basically trying to do is make a mesh of a piece of paper, create a rig for it, and then have the rig react to physics, such as forces like wind and collision objects and stuff like that, and then skin the mesh to that rig. And the reason why we're using a particle system is because we want it to be dynamic, right? And react to forces and stuff like that, instead of using something like Mass Effects toolkit or something like that. I don't know. Alright, so let's get started. We're going to grab this grid. So this is the grid that all the particles are currently being generated in. We don't need to see the collision shape right now. We're actually going to turn this off for a second. So this is our grid that the particles are being generated in. So we can move this grid if we like, which we are going to move it to 0, 0. And then we want this grid to be the width and length of the piece of paper, so 11 inches, 8 inches, and then maybe 2 inches high. Might be a little high, but whatever. Alright, fine, 1 inch high. Okay, so now we want these, but if we now turn the particles back to visual, you can see there's only 2 really big boxes. So these boxes, we need them to be, let's say, 1 inch width, height, whatever. So if we have this 8 inches wide, we might want to divide the grid, and the grid size is kind of the grid spacing between the particles, right? So if we have this 8 inches wide, okay, so let's just make the grid spacing about 2.6. So this will give us a nice little grid of boxes. Now, to test this, to test how these boxes behave, what we can do is add a force. Okay, you would add a force just like you would add a force with a normal particle system, but we're going to use a different controller for it. So in here, what you would normally do is go to force and you drag that in, but because we want this force to react to physics, we're going to use this mParticle force. I'm going to drag that in, and then we're going to select, just like you would with the other one, we're going to select the wind, and now let's make sure the wind has something going on. So we'll say it's maybe 0.5 turbulence, 1 strength is fine, and we're going to see the range and then just let it, decay. So now when we run these particles, you can see they already are reacting to the wind pretty nicely. Maybe we want them to get a little bit more altitude, and that's pretty good. But what you can also see is that the particles right now are acting independently of each other. So as they're being thrown around by the wind, they all go their own separate ways. And what would happen now is if we were to skin a piece of paper to these particles, we would see like the piece of paper shape would be like this shape, so it would like stretch all over the place. So we want to constrain the particles to themselves, to each other a little bit, and in an effort to do so, we're going to have to kind of lock them together, I guess you could say. We're going to use a glue system, right? So this is called an mParticle glue. You can just drag this in, and to see what's going on, you can click this visualize binding, Now once you click this, usually it won't show you the binding until you get to frame 0 again. So you'll just have to drag your timeline and then drag it back, and now you see these blue lines, or if we want to separate it from the world, from the particle world thingy, we're going to make those red lines. So you see these red lines connecting to each other, and basically what they're doing is just on every frame they're going to try to keep those particles together. So it's still being pushed away by the wind, but now it's being pushed away as one piece. And what you can see is they bend pretty decently, but not really enough for us. It depends on what kind of piece of paper we want, right? This is pretty good piece of paper, but we might want it to be a little bit more bendy, like soft paper, maybe like tissue paper, just to make it more interesting. But to test what this actually looks like, let's add a little collision shape into it. Now collision shapes are also very similar to adding shapes in within the old system. The only difference is you have instead of adding a U deflector to deflect the shape, to use the actual geometry, in this case we're going to use a modifier called a p-flow collision shape modifier. So once you add that in there, you click on smooth and you click on activate. Now this is an active piece of collision shape. The next step will be, instead of adding a collision, you'll be adding an mParticle collision, which is the same thing, but again it keeps all the physics stuff in mind. So once you add this event, you just add the collision shape, which you can only add if you have the p-flow collision shape on there, and then you'll say it tests true if the particle collides. So now that we place this in the pieces of paper's path, we can see how the piece of paper actually behaves when it hits something. Yeah, that wasn't very cool. But the good thing is that it does collide. Now, what I really don't like, well, besides the fact that it just kind of goes through the object, what I really don't like is the fact that it stays very rigid. We want this to be a little bit more interesting, so let's make that a little bit more jiggly, I would say. So the first thing, not to necessarily make this more jiggly, but overall a change I would like to do is increase the size of the grid a little bit, just to see what it does with the collision. Now you see it's not moving anymore, and this is because the size is actually manipulating the volume or mass of the object based on the volume of the scale. We don't want that. We want to control, while it's more realistic, sure, we do want to control the mass of the object individually, so that we have more say over how it behaves. So instead of saying by density under MP shape, we're going to say by volume, so by value. So we can specify, alright, we want these guys to all be heavy as one. And now we can see the collision is happening a lot better. It's not going through the object, but you can see it's kind of like a piece of paper. I mean a piece of plastic, right? Kind of bending in a weird kind of way, but it's pretty cool already. What we could also do is, if we want to make sure that it doesn't stand up at any point on its side like that, we could say that instead of using a cube, we can use like a sphere, and then we tell the collision shape to also be a sphere. And now if we see after it collides, it should have a much easier time falling down. It took a while, but it does its thing. So now instead of using the rigid setting for the particle glue, we're going to use something called distance, and this will make the connections between the particles a lot more flexible. At this point, it'll probably be a little bit too flexible, but just to demonstrate the point. Now we can see here, this is acting a lot more like a piece of paper already. Well, kind of cluttery piece of paper, and it's getting all tangled up, but you can kind of see what's going on, and that it is a lot more dynamic. So let's increase the size a little bit so they don't get all tangled up. Maybe 3, I don't know if that's too much. And maybe to turn down the bendiness a little bit of the connections, we're going to go in here and we're going to say that instead of its relative stretchiness, or how much we want to allow the connections to stretch, being 120, we're going to say like 101. And then we're also going to say, because right now they can go into each other as much as they want, but we want it to be relative to what it is. So let's say we don't want it to go into each other more than 80% or even 95%. Oops. Now let's see how that behaves. Okay, it's one piece of paper flying and it's hitting the thing, and it's a little too rigid. You see, so now we added all these parameters, and it's saying, ooh, I'm gonna be all stiff now. So let's counter that a little bit, because if we look at the connections, if I turn this to wireframe, we can tell, ooh, this is kind of intersecting itself. I see, that's why it's kind of pushing itself out. Okay, so first of all, the shape is a little too big, so maybe 2.8. Oops, 2.8. Still, okay, 2.5. Okay, so not too shady. Now, if we want more connections, you can see there's a connection going here, here, and here. And this is, but there's no connection going from here to here. Now, this is not because the distance is any bigger or any, there is not any problem there. The reason why it's not doing that connection is because it is only allowing a maximum of 4 connections. You see, so 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we wanted to maintain its shape a little more, we can increase the amount of connections that we allow it to make. So we can go on to the glue system, and this sort of thing will take a lot of playing around with, so you understand what's going on, but I'll just give you kind of the rundown. So if we go into this glue system, we can say max binding particles is 8 instead. So now you can see that it allows 8 connections between each particle. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? Now, whenever you increase this particle, this max binding, it increases the calculations that it has to do for each particular frame. Now, if you go into the world system here, the mParticle world or MP world, you'll see under advanced parameters, right now it's doing a subframe factor of 2, which is the default, but when you increase this number, you generally also want to increase this number, but it is a little bit complicated on how you go about it. Basically, it's just you add this number by 2. You multiply the number by 2 and add 2 on top of it. But we're not going to do that right now. But I'm just going to give you a heads up that if you are running into issues that seem to be unpredictable, then take this number here, multiply it by 2, and add 2 on top of it. So we would put 18 in here, for instance, right? To get this to calculate correctly. But right now we're just gonna leave it as default. We only have a few particles. It's not such a big deal. So now let's see what happens. We have this nice little, ooh, that's pretty cool. But to make this a little bit more interesting, why don't we bump up the turbulence, and we're going to bring this kind of off center so that like the corner of it hits or whatever, right? So that the piece of paper kind of flings around it. So let's run that, and we see, bam, maybe that's a little much. We can also live, manipulate how this plays out. It's pretty good, but let's bump up the turbulence some more. Yeah, that's pretty interesting, right? Let's drag this in a little bit. Wow. Cool. Now, what we can do here is, if we want this to act a little bit more interesting, you see how it hits the thing nicely, but then when it hits the floor, it just kind of slides as if we are like in a classroom with like these glossy floors. Let's say we have a little bit more interesting floor. We can go to this world here, and we can say the floor has a friction of maybe 9 or something like that. Now when we hit the floor, there's a lot, yeah, wow, that doesn't look too great. See that now? Yeah, I mean it's cool, I guess. Maybe we'll. Alright, I'm getting too kind of carried away with playing around with the look of things, but when I should just be talking about methods. But yeah, so so let's go on to the next step. The next step would be to grab this piece of paper and actually make some sort of mesh, right? So we can say, but I don't want to just give it a normal sort of grid. I want to give it a very irregular grid, so that it bends more interesting instead of all computery. So I'm going to grab this border, and I'm just going to convert the border to a shape and say that this is the paper mesh, P-mesh for short. And then I'm going to grab this border, and I'm going to add garment maker to give it a, oops, click on the wrong modifier, sorry. I'm going to add the garment maker, garment maker. Now this is a little too dense. You don't want, you know how usually you would try to get as much detail as possible. That might not be a good idea in this case, because you want to control a lot of the shape of it with like a turbo smooth or mesh smooth or whatever, because otherwise it will too closely resemble the shape of the rig when it's being animated. but you'll see what I mean in a minute. So we're going to convert this to an eligible poly. I'm going to get rid of the plane, which kicks me out of isolation mode. And then what you can do is you can select this P mesh. You go down here and you add particle skinner, and then by list you add which system you wish to add, and which is the particle system that we're going to be using. And you are going to say all events, but if you have a more complicated system, you can just do individual events, and then you apply skinning. So now you see that the piece of paper is now being manipulated by these particles. Now we can say that right now it's saying each particle has an influence distance of 10, which is total overkill for us, so we're just going to say like 1 maybe. Now it's leaving too much behind, so let's say maybe 2, or let's say, can we do this? No. Alright, bad guess. Alright, so 2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to open up the particle system, and we're going to say, alright, we no longer want to see the bindings, we don't want to visualize the bindings, and we also don't want to actually see the particles, because we just want to see what the paper is doing right now. So when we go back here, we can add a turbo smooth on top of the paper, and then if we unselect the paper, we can see like, oh, what is this piece of paper doing? Look at that, nice little collision, and it hits the floor, right? So that is pretty much it for the tutorial that was taken from the toolbox website, right? That is like the basic system. So now, in an effort to get something like you saw in the video, what I had to do was write a script that pretty much automates this process, right? That generates these particles and generates the bindings between them, creates this piece of mesh at the same place as the particles, links the mesh, turns on the skinning for the mesh, and then pushes that rig out of the way to do the whole thing again. And then it generates like 100 pieces of paper with all their individual rig, everyone with each piece of paper with its individual rig, and then all you have to do is play with the forces to say that it needs to, that it needs to behave in a certain way, and all the forces, because all the forces, even though that this is skinned now and everything, all the forces are still alive. So I can manipulate this wind source, and you can see that the particle system is manipulating this piece of paper live, right? So I can really control what I want it to do, how I want it to behave, and get a nice little result out of that, right? So thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Give me a thumbs down if I wasted your time, like always. Subscribe if you want to see some more. Check out my other videos if you want. I welcome any comments you have or any questions you may have. Just email me. Alright, bye.